Welcome back to the Ephemeris podcast. I'm your host, Aphelion, and thanks for joining me for another week, another episode. Today, as promised, our episode is going to be about William Herschel, as we are technically discovering more about cosmology throughout history. I know this episode isn't necessarily that, or doesn't necessarily revolve around cosmological theory, but the cataloging of non solar system objects is critical to our understanding of the universe, so I've given it a little light in the last 2 weeks. So that's how we're rolling for now. I'm going to see what to plan next because, yeah, we've got probably a busy 2 or 3 centuries still to look at. So, yeah, let's get into William Herschel himself. So, who was he? He was a German British astronomer, and he was a composer as well, which I thought I would leave a note or two on at the end. So, if you're looking for some background information on his compositions, I will talk about that at the end of this episode when we're done with all the astronomy. William Herschel was born in 1738, Hanover, England, and he was the father of a musician, so maybe that's a bit of a giveaway as to why he was a composer. And early in his life, he was interested in music theory, which led to him kind of gaining an interest in harmonics, and then that moved towards optics because of its relative, or sort of its slight relation. And yeah, once he discovered some cool things about optics, that landed him in the endeavor of observing the night sky through telescopes, because those are optical instruments, obviously, and that's where our story begins. So, in the 1770s, Herschel took lessons from a local mirror builder and became interested in making his own telescopes. And I believe this process came with a lot of trial and error, but eventually, after he started grinding his lenses from metal discs of copper, tin, and antimony in various proportions, he came up with some really, really good telescopes. And I'm telling you, I promise you, these telescopes were no joke. The first telescopes he made that were successful had focal lengths from 7 to 10 feet. And if you match this with the right eyepiece, you get a magnification power of almost 6,000 times. That is huge. And it really is no wonder that he was able to create such a huge catalog in the New General Catalog, which is like 7,000 or so objects, which, I mean, he had to have observed at least 3,000 of those. So, yeah, he wouldn't be able to do such a feat if he didn't have really, really good telescopes. And one of the more famous telescopes he made was the 40-foot telescope. I don't know if it's the one that achieves 6,000 times magnification, but yeah, that's another cool thing about Herschel. And so, with that, obviously, it's important to know what he was able to do with it because that's really where the bulk of his work happens. The first thing he found was Uranus with his telescope. And for context, at this point in time, all planets up to Saturn were very well known to us. Obviously, we've talked about like Mercury to Jupiter in pretty much every cosmological theory. In like from like what, Copernicus, yeah. So those planets have been there since cosmological theories of Copernicus. Saturn, it I'm not actually sure why it wasn't included in cosmological theories because we have been able to observe it with the naked eye for quite a long time. But yeah, just main thing to know is we've known all of the planets till Saturn and not just till Jupiter. And the way that Herschel found Uranus was very similar to Messier. He was looking up in the night sky, he saw some small object moving, and it looked like a comet, but it was not. And so he realized it was a planet after more observation. From there, his work was focused on the investigation of double stars. He cataloged binary star systems and multi stars, and I'm not quite sure what is meant by, like multiple stars or, you know, multi stars. I'm assuming it's like some kind of extrinsic binary that doesn't fit into our typical definition of a binary system, like it's not quite like white dwarfs or white dwarf binaries, but it might be maybe like an ecliptic binary. But that's just an hypothesis of what is meant by multiple stars. So in general, we're talking about stellar systems, though. So by 1784, he had cataloged nearly 500 of these systems. And the reason why he was doing this is he was trying to find evidence of shifts in stellar systems due to the changes in relative positions of Earth, what we call parallax, right? Cool astronomical term for all my nerds out there. But when he revisited these stellar systems at the turn of the century, so it was about like 10, 15 years later, he realized the shifts he saw weren't exactly parallax, or they couldn't completely be justified by parallax. And what he hypothesized was that there is some kind of mutual behavior between these stars, and it was not just that the position of the Earth was changing, it was sort of this supposedly mutual behavior. And with this hypothesis, Herschel proposed that there was a mutual gravitational attraction between these stellar systems, which made them, quote unquote, binary sidereal systems. So, yeah, with his investigation and discovery of like a total of 800 stellar systems or something, Herschel made a huge step towards uncovering the inner workings of celestial objects in the universe. Binary star systems have a really interesting evolutionary path, and they lead to all sorts of celestial objects that we may or may not have covered in season one. So that's really, you could consider it's really a breakthrough if you think about it that way. And it's pretty groundbreaking. So, lastly, Herschel's work concerned a lot of deep sky surveys. Obviously, why would we know him for the New General Catalog if he wasn't doing deep sky surveying? And as for the facts of his cataloging, he published 3, and it was in the span of about a decade, and he discovered 2,000 or so nebulae. And he even classified these nebulae, which actually included other galaxies at the time because nebula was like an umbrella term. So he classified these nebulae into 8 categories. The first couple are based on brightness. Ranging from very faint to bright, but then there are classes like planetary nebulae, very large nebulae, and others which categorize nebulae based on compression, richness, and coarseness. So, all, very interesting ideas about the nebulae that Herschel discovered. These days, it's easier to classify nebulae or galaxies based on compression, or sorry, not compression, but like densities and star types and chemical compositions and all these different factors. But sort of the way that Herschel classified these nebulae shows how novel the idea of a nebula is at the time. So, yeah, those are the 3 main things that William Herschel did with his huge telescopes, amazing magnification, and all of that. Some miscellaneous things to mention. This is a nice quotation that I found online. In early 1800, Herschel was testing different filters to pass sunlight through, and noticed that filters of different colors seemed to generate varying amounts of heat. He decided to pass the light through a prism to measure the different colors of light using a thermometer, and in the process took a measurement just beyond the red end of the visible spectrum. He detected a temperature 1 degree higher than that of red light. Further experimentation led to Herschel's conclusion that there must be an invisible form of light beyond the visible spectrum. he published these results in April 1800. So basically, this was Herschel's way or method of discovering infrared light and sort of the radiation from the sun that occurs in the infrared part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So yeah, that's another thing that tends to get mentioned about Herschel. And before we leave the astronomical work of Herschel, I do want to give some recognition to the work of Herschel's sister, Caroline. Caroline was particularly helpful in polishing lenses of William's and recording her own observation, or recording his observations. But that isn't all she did. She did her own observations. She went on to observe like 8 new comets and 14 new nebulae with William, but I think after that, she went on to observe like thousands more nebulae on her own. And she made the independent discovery of Messier 110 or NGC 205, NGC referring to New General Catalog, which was a second companion to the Andromeda Galaxy. So she did quite a lot of work, and props to her. She may be the first woman who is somewhat recognized in the field of astronomy in terms of chronological order. And honestly, I think any non-white male in the field of astronomy, especially at this time, is something to be celebrated, because historically the field of astronomy has not been very diverse. So yeah, I did want to give props there and recognition, just because of the fact that Caroline was a non-white male doing some very amazing things in terms of observational astronomy. So yeah, I'll leave that there. I did say I was going to leave a note about the musical works of William Herschel. So here is a complete musical or a complete musical works. I don't know if that's how you refer to it, but a complete list of musical works. There you go. Sorry, my brain is a bit funky today. So the list goes as such. He wrote 18 symphonies for small orchestra, 6 symphonies for large orchestra, 12 concertos for oboe, violin, and viola, 2 concertos for organ, 6 sonatas for violin, cello, and harpsichord, 12 solos for violin and basso continuo. Hopefully I'm not messing up the pronunciations. I probably am. But yeah, 24 capriccios and 1 sonata for solo violin, 1 andante for 2 basset horns, 2 oboes, 2 horns, and 2 bassoons. Various vocal works, including a Te Deum, psalms, motets, and sacred chants, along with some catches. So that is quite a lot of work that Herschel did in terms of music. And so, I mean, it was quite necessary to leave some notes on that, because, Herschel's sort of passion was not in one place. It wasn't directly in astronomy. It was in several facets, like music, optics, and all of that stuff. So yeah, that is all I have to talk about for William Herschel. I know with the Messier episode, we went into some of the objects, but if I were to find objects from the New General Catalog and try to convince you that they are some of the most important in the catalog, that would be a meticulous task, a very tedious one, because I mean there's so many of them, and some we don't have as much information on than others. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. If you guys enjoyed hearing about this episode on William Herschel, I would appreciate a follow on Spotify if you are listening on Spotify, and a subscribe on YouTube if you are listening on YouTube. And until next week, I will see you all later. Peace.